She was just a nurse until a billionaire in a coma opened his eyes and whispered, "You brought me back." From that moment, Nora Bennett's world unraveled into a storm of secrets, betrayal, and a love that defied the odds. As she fought to protect her mother and uncover the truth, one decision would change not just her life, but an entire city. Who was this quiet woman who turned pain into purpose and built hope from heartbreak? You'll want to hear every second of her journey. Where are you watching from? Let us know below, and don't forget to subscribe for more powerful stories like this. Rain draped Portland in silver threads, the kind that made the city feel smaller, quieter, as though the clouds had folded themselves around every rooftop and alley. Inside St. Gabriel's Hospital, the hum of machines and the muted shuffle of rubber soles blended with the soft rhythm of the downpour. The night shift breathed like a living thing, steady, unseen, essential. Nora Bennett moved through it like a gentle current, her scrubs faintly wrinkled after 12 hours on her feet. Her hair, the color of honey and just as soft, was swept into a lazy bun that bounced slightly with each step. Her green eyes were sharp despite the fatigue, holding both a nurse's alertness and an artist's soul, though few knew the latter still lived inside her. She paused at a chart near room 312, brushing her fingertips along the clipboard's edge. Her movements were careful, practiced, but her thoughts had drifted back 5 years, to the day her world cracked open like a fault line. Her father, Thomas Bennett, a carpenter with a laugh like a warm fire, had been diagnosed with pancreatic cancer. The disease devoured him, fast. The bills that followed finished the job, nearly $95,000, leaving Nora and her mother Marie trapped in a one-bedroom apartment with faded wallpaper and a broken radiator that coughed more than it heated. Her mother's arthritis had worsened since then. Her hands, once nimble with gardening and knitting, now curled painfully around hot tea mugs, barely able to button a coat. They lived close, both in space and survival, but the cost was high. Every overtime shift Nora picked up wasn't for ambition, but for rent. For medicine. For keeping the heat on. She had once dreamed of color, of sketchbooks and oil pastels, of bridges drawn with perfect lines, of her art on gallery walls. That dream now lived in a dusty box under her bed, the pages yellowed and forgotten. Her hands no longer smeared charcoal or paint, only iodine and ointment. Still, she found small ways to bring art into the sterile halls. A cartoon puppy drawn on a child's cast. A tiny flower doodled on a sticky note left on a coworker's locker. It wasn't much, but it let her feel, if only for a moment, that the girl who once saw the world in color still breathed somewhere beneath the nurse who worked until her bones ached. Tonight, room 312 held someone new. A man, Comatose, admitted in silence and secrecy. Word among the nurses was that he was some kind of VIP. No name listed on the room plate, no visitors, high security on his chart. Nora wasn't one for gossip, but when she saw his name, Julian Hayes, it rang a bell. Some tech mogul. Disappeared in a boating accident 3 months ago. Assumed dead, now lying silent in a corner room under flickering fluorescent light. None of it mattered to Nora. Patients were patients. Illness, wealth, pain, they didn't discriminate. She stepped into the room, her presence soft. The space was dim, save for the bedside lamp casting golden light across monitors that blinked with quiet precision. Julian lay still, a shadow of a man. His face was pale. Lips cracked, hair longer than it should have been, falling across his brow like a forgotten thought. A scar curved beneath his lower lip, a faded comma that suggested a story she'd never read. Nora spoke, as she always did with unconscious patience. "You're safe here," she whispered, dipping a sponge into warm water. Her voice was a thread of comfort, woven from the scraps of Billie Holiday's "I'll Be Seeing You" that she hummed as she worked. She unbuttoned his hospital gown gently, folding it down, and ran the sponge across his chest in slow, circular strokes. The room was still, the kind of stillness that held its own breath. She watched the rise and fall of his chest, timed to the beeps of the heart monitor, her fingers moving with practiced ease. And then something shifted. The monitor flickered, a twitch, his hand moved. Nora's body went cold. His eyes opened, sharp gray alive. They locked on hers. The sponge dropped from her hand, splashing water across the tiles. Her mouth opened, but no sound came. Her heartbeat surged in her ears like a tidal wave. He blinked, slow and strained, as if surfacing from a dream. "Who are you?" he rasped, voice like rust breaking loose. Nora took a trembling step back, hands hovering near his pulse point. He was awake. Awake. The man who'd been lost to the world was here, looking at her like she was the only anchor he could find. "You're okay," she breathed, finally finding her voice. "I'm Nora, your nurse." He swallowed, his lips cracked. "You brought me back." And just like that, everything changed. Julian's recovery was swift, astonishing the doctors and stirring whispers through the halls of St. Gabriel's. His vitals stabilized faster than anyone predicted, his motor functions returning day by day with a quiet, unyielding determination. But it wasn't the medicine or therapy that seemed to pull him back from the edge. It was something else, something harder to quantify. Every morning when Nora entered room 312, he greeted her with the same quiet gratitude, his gray eyes tracking her every movement as if trying to memorize her shape, her rhythm, the softness in her voice. And though she kept her tone professional, her fingers steady, something about the way he watched her made her chest tighten. He spoke more as the days went on, halting at first, then with increasing clarity. One evening, while she changed his IV bag, he looked at her and said, "They say it was a storm, but I remember something else." Nora paused, letting the drip resume before turning to him. "Something else like what?" she asked, her voice careful. He studied her as though weighing how much to reveal. "The yacht didn't just go down. I think someone wanted it to." Nora blinked, heart ticking faster. "You think it was deliberate?" He nodded slowly. "I can't prove it yet, but there are pieces that don't fit. The timing, the engine failure, the lack of backup signals." He stared at the ceiling, a muscle twitching in his jaw. "I woke up and realized I don't just want to survive, I want to change everything." Then his eyes met hers again. "I want to build something that matters." It wasn't the kind of thing billionaires usually said, at least not the ones she'd seen on television or read about in passing headlines. But there was no pomp in Julian's voice, no practiced PR sheen. It was quiet, earnest, raw. He waited a beat before continuing. "I want to build a foundation, Clara's hope, for my sister." His voice caught on her name. "She died of leukemia 5 years ago. We had money, connections, everything. But even that couldn't save her. You'd be amazed how many families get crushed by costs. We survived, but most don't." Nora stilled. The mention of money and medicine and death lit a cold flicker in her chest. It was a language she understood. "I want to open a center here, in Portland," he said. "Free cancer care, no billing nightmares, no insurance hoops, just treatment, dignity, and rest." He glanced at her then like he was saying more than the words alone. "I want you to help me build it." Nora's breath hitched. "Me?" Julian nodded. "I've seen how you move through this place, with care, with grit. You don't look past people." His voice softened. "That's rare, Nora. That's what Clara had. That's what I see in you." She stared at him, unsure whether to feel flattered or overwhelmed. The thought of leaving the wards, the routine, the only world she'd known for nearly a decade, it stirred both wonder and terror. "I'm just a nurse," she said quietly. "You're not just anything," Julian replied, firm. "You're the reason I woke up." That night, she sat beside her mother, who was curled in her recliner with a heating pad wrapped around her knees. The apartment was dim, a single lamp casting shadows on the peeling wallpaper. Nora told her everything: Julian's plan, the center, the offer. Marie's hands, twisted from arthritis, reached out to squeeze her daughter's. "Your father would have leapt at this," she whispered. "He gave so much to others, so have you. But this is your chance to give more, and live while doing it." Nora looked down at her mother's hands, bruised at the knuckles, veins prominent beneath paper-thin skin, and remembered her father's calloused palms brushing charcoal from her childhood drawings. She nodded, a promise shaping itself in silence. The next morning, she returned to the hospital before her shift began, heart hammering against her ribs. She found Julian sitting up in bed, the window cracked open, letting in the scent of wet pine. "I'm in," she said simply. Julian smiled, and for the first time it reached all the way to his eyes. "Then let's build something that lasts." The rhythm of building Clara's hope became its own kind of heartbeat. Blueprints replaced patient charts, community meetings took the place of ward rounds, and Nora found herself learning the language of permits, fundraising, and architectural sketches. But late at night, when the city exhaled and the rain returned to whisper at her window, She sometimes wondered if she was in over her head. Still, she pressed forward, the image of her father's hands and her mother's quiet pride pushing her onward. Julian was tireless. His energy surged through each decision, his ideas flowing like water that somehow always found a path. But when the meetings ended and the papers were stacked neatly on his desk, his voice would soften, his gaze lingering on Nora like she was the only fixed point in a world still rebuilding itself. One afternoon, while sorting a stack of donor records in Julian's temporary office at the hospital, Nora's fingers slipped on a manila folder. A yellowed letter tumbled free and fluttered to the floor. She bent to retrieve it, its paper worn and edges curled like something treasured or forgotten. Her eyes scanned the ink. It was dated nearly 15 years ago. A thank you note. To the donor at St. Gabriel's, it read, "Your blood gave my sister another month. For that, you gave us more than time, you gave us hope. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. Ellie Hayes." Nora's heart stuttered. Her breath caught. The donor's ID code was scrawled in the corner. She knew it. T. Bennett. Her father. Her father had been the one to give blood that helped Clara, Julian's sister, hold on just a little longer. A lump formed in her throat, cold and hard. Had Julian known? Had he picked her because of that? Was all of this opportunity, this growing closeness, just a repayment cloaked in charity? She slid the letter back into the folder, her hand trembling. She didn't ask Julian about it. Not that day. Not the next. Instead, she smiled during meetings, nodded during presentations, and clutched her sketchbook tighter each time he said something kind, something thoughtful. The letter weighed in her pocket like a stone she couldn't set down. Then came the whispers. A nurse caught her eye in the hallway, murmuring about secrets buried in the billionaire's files. Something about land transfers. Something about PR spin. And then Renee Dalton arrived. Slick, poised in all angles, Renee swept into the hospital with a practiced smile and a wardrobe tailored to perfection. Julian's ex-girlfriend and current PR advisor had a reputation for getting what she wanted. She walked into meetings as if she owned the oxygen and left with everyone's attention. Nora tried to stay in her lane, but Renee made it impossible. "You're the nurse," she said one day, her tone dipped in sugar but sharp enough to cut. "Helping Julian with his little passion project. How quaint." Nora met her gaze evenly. "Just doing my part." But Renee stayed, and at every meeting, every event, she was there, polished, prepared, and perfectly dismissive. She took the mic before Nora could. She answered donor questions with buzzwords, while Nora's honest answers faltered under the weight of self-doubt. It all came to a head at a community fundraiser. Nora stood alone in front of a skeptical crowd, her palms clammy, her throat dry. Renee was late, intentionally, Nora suspected, and Julian was delayed by a phone call. Left to explain the vision, Nora stumbled, her voice cracking as a donor asked, "And what makes you qualified to lead something like this?" The words stung. She opened her mouth, but nothing came. Later that night, she sat by her mother's bedside, Maria asleep, her breathing shallow but steady. Nora stared at her sketchbook, open to a page where Julian's face had begun to take shape. Her lines were clean, confident, but now the expression looked foreign. Calculated. She didn't know if she could trust it anymore. That's when the knock came. A face she hadn't seen in years. Derek, her cousin, stood in the doorway. The last time she saw him was at her father's funeral. Now he wore a cheap leather jacket and a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes. "Heard you're in with a billionaire," he said, stepping inside uninvited. "Grace needs more than good intentions, Nora. Think big. Let him pay." She stepped back. "This isn't about money, isn't it?" he said, tossing a folded paper onto the table. "You might want to read that. Julian isn't who you think he is." Then he was gone. The paper held printouts of emails, harsh, corporate, and cold. They outlined plans to sell the land Clara's hope was being built on. Nora's blood turned to ice. Was it real or a trick? She didn't know. All she knew was that her faith in Julian, her anchor, was beginning to slip. The day of the groundbreaking dawned with thunderclouds hanging low, as if the sky itself hesitated. Nora stood at the edge of the muddy field where Clara's hope was meant to rise, her coat clinging to her body, her shoes already soaked. The scaffolding above the makeshift stage creaked softly in the wind, its steel skeleton promising both shelter and threat. Around her, Folding chairs had been arranged in rows, now sparsely filled with donors sheltering beneath umbrellas, their faces blurry through the falling rain. Every breath Nora took tasted of iron and worry. Julian was late. Again. Renee, of course, was not. Renee stood under a white canopy, the center of every camera's gaze, smiling like the storm hadn't dampened her silk dress. "We're thrilled to welcome you," she said into the microphone, her voice smooth, "to a vision that honors the legacy of Clara Hayes and the philanthropic brilliance of Julian Hayes." Nora, waiting in the wings with her speech folded like a secret in her pocket, watched as Renee soaked up the credit like sunlight, never once mentioning Nora's name. When it was finally Nora's turn, the wind picked up. She stepped onto the stage, the wooden planks groaning beneath her boots, and adjusted the mic with cold fingers. Her notes trembled. She began to speak, voice soft, unsure. "Clara's hope is more than a building," she said, glancing at her mother seated in the front row in a wheelchair, rain seeping into the blanket Nora had tucked around her legs. "It's a promise. To every family who's been crushed by bills, to every patient who was told no because they couldn't afford yes." A gust of wind caught the edge of her coat. She lost her place. People murmured. Someone yawned. Renee smiled tightly from the sidelines. Nora finished in a rush and stepped off stage, the applause tepid at best. She crouched by her mother, adjusting her blanket again, feeling smaller than she had in years. "You did good, honey," Rory whispered, her voice thin but warm. But Nora didn't feel it. She felt alone. Nearby, Mia, the young volunteer who'd bonded with Nora over their shared love of sketching, appeared beside her, soaked to the skin. "Can I help?" she asked, gesturing toward a banner that had come loose. Nora nodded, grateful for her presence, and turned to help guide her toward the stage. That's when she saw it. A beam above them shifted. Just slightly, but enough. A screw gleamed out of place. Another gust rattled the entire rig. Nora's blood froze. "Get back!" she screamed, pushing Mia away. "Everybody move!" The crowd scattered, umbrellas collapsing, chairs tumbling over. Mia slipped in the mud near the stage. Grace's wheelchair stuck in the thick muck, unable to move. Nora's heart cracked open in terror. She ran, lungs burning. "Mom!" she shouted, shoving through bodies and splashing through puddles. The scaffolding gave a sickening groan. Steel twisted. The beam dropped with a thunderous crack. The ground shook. Nora hit the mud on her knees, crawling. "Grace!" she sobbed, reaching the collapsed wheelchair. One side was crushed. Her mother's hand twitched beneath the blanket. "Hold on, I've got you, I've got you." Mia lay nearby, a cry escaping her lips. Her leg was pinned. Nora gripped her hand. "You're okay. You're okay, Mia, I've got you too." A voice shouted her name. "Julian?" He was running toward her, suit drenched, face pale, blood dripping from a cut along his forearm. He dropped beside her, eyes wild. "Help me lift," he said. Together, in the pouring rain, they braced their shoulders beneath the beam. Nora's muscles screamed. Julian's arm trembled violently, his jaw clenched tight. Inch by inch, the beam shifted. A bystander pulled Mia free. But Grace was deeper. Still too trapped. One more push. Nora bit back a cry. The beam rose just enough. She dragged her mother out, cradling her in her lap as the rain blurred everything. Grace coughed weakly, her eyes fluttering open. "You're safe," Nora whispered, her whole body shaking. Julian dropped beside her, breathing hard, his hand finding hers. She looked at him, soaked and bleeding, and finally pulled the letter from her pocket, wet now, but legible. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "About my dad, the donation. T. Bennett." He blinked, understanding crashing into his expression. "I didn't know," he said, his voice cracking. "I wrote dozens of letters to donors. I never saw the names. I swear to you, Nora, I chose you because you are Clara's hope." Nora's breath caught, her father's memory, her mother's strength, and this man beside her, broken and whole all at once. She believed him, and in the silence after the storm, that belief felt like coming home. Sunlight finally returned to Portland, soft and golden, casting long shadows across the newly laid foundation of Clara's hope. The center rose from the mud and memory like something sacred. Steel bones wrapped in glass and purpose. Nora stood in the atrium on opening day, her dress a pale blue that matched the mural behind her. A bridge stretching toward the sky, its arches bathed in watercolor light. Her locket glinted at her throat, the silver warm against her skin. On the walls, her art bloomed, faces of survivors, sketches of healing hands, portraits of ordinary people made extraordinary by their quiet battles. Among them, her father smiled from a charcoal drawing, his eyes kind, his calloused hands cupping a hammer. Donors filled the space, their earlier doubts dissolved like mist. Mia stood at the front, her once pinned leg now strong beneath her, unveiling the mural she and Nora had painted together. Her smile was shy but proud, her eyes shining with the kind of hope that doesn't fade easily. Grace sat nearby, no longer in a wheelchair, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, the one Nora had bought with her first paycheck from the foundation. She looked stronger, steadier, her voice more certain as she leaned toward Nora. "Your father's here," she whispered, eyes locked on the mural. "And he's so proud, honey." Nora couldn't speak. She could only hold her mother's hand tighter. Julian stood beside her, his hand resting gently on the small of her back. He wore no suit today, just a white shirt rolled at the sleeves, a reminder that some titles didn't need fabric to carry weight. He stepped forward to address the crowd, his voice calm, steady. "Clara's hope is for every family who's ever felt forgotten. It's for the nights you don't know how to keep going, and it's for the people who show up anyway." His eyes found Nora's. This center exists because of Nora Bennett, because of her courage, her vision, her belief in something better. Applause followed, but Nora barely heard it. Her gaze stayed locked on Julian, her chest tight with something too big to name. When he turned back toward her, his eyes held something quieter than pride, something more lasting. Later that evening, as the last guests trickled out and the hallways grew still again, Julian led Nora outside to the garden behind the center. Spring had painted everything in green and gold. Roses climbed the trellises. The same fountain where Nora had once found Mia sketching now rippled peacefully under the fading light. Julian held a small box in his palm, his fingers trembling slightly. He opened it slowly, revealing a simple silver ring. Carved into its surface was the outline of a bridge, her first sketch, reborn. "I read Clara's journal again," he said softly, his voice rough around the edges. "She wrote about heroes, not the loud ones but the quiet ones, the ones who do the work, love fiercely and never stop trying. You're that person, Nora. You woke me up. Not just from the coma, you woke up everything." Her breath caught. He stepped closer, lifting the ring between them. "I don't want to build anything else without you. Be my partner, my home, forever." Tears welled in Nora's eyes, but her smile broke through them like morning light. She nodded, words lost to the moment, and let him slide the ring onto her finger. The metal was cool, perfect, and her locket bumped gently against it as she leaned in and kissed him, slow, deep, full of every moment they had earned. The seasons passed, and Clara's hope became more than a center. It became a community. Nora and Julian moved into a house just down the road. With wide windows and a sunroom, Nora turned into her studio. Grace lived in a cottage nearby, her knitting needles busy once more, blankets stacked in baskets for the patients. One evening, Nora sat on a bench beside the fountain, sketchbook open in her lap. Julian played soft jazz on the center's old piano inside, the notes drifting through the open windows. Mia sat nearby, now applying for art school, her pencil gliding over paper. Grace hummed as she finished a scarf. An older man approached, his steps slow, his eyes kind. "You saved me," he said to Nora, his hand resting gently over hers. "This place saved me." Nora smiled, the locket warm at her chest, Julian's ring firm on her finger. She looked around at the people she loved, the place they built from rain and faith, and felt her heart fill. "We made it," she whispered. Julian's voice floated from behind her, soft and certain. "We did, love." And above them, Portland's sky blushed pink and gold. The rain now only a distant memory, one that had once woken everything. Life lesson from the story. Sometimes the most powerful transformations begin in silence, the quiet sacrifices we make, the kindness we offer without recognition, and the hope we dare to carry when the world feels heavy. Nora Bennett's journey reminds us that we don't have to be extraordinary to make a difference. What matters is showing up, day after day, shift after shift. Her decision to choose compassion over fear, to keep dreaming even when her dreams were buried beneath responsibility, is what changed her life, and countless others. This story teaches us that healing isn't just about medicine or miracles. It's about people, about showing up for one another, believing in the quiet strength of love, and daring to trust again after heartbreak. Even when doubt crept in and the truth felt uncertain, Nora led with her heart. And because of that, a community rose from the ground. A locket became a legacy. A sketch turned into a sanctuary. We are reminded that grief doesn't have to end us. It can shape us into someone stronger, someone softer, someone capable of lighting the way for others. In a world filled with noise, it's the quiet courage, the whispered promises, the hands that reach out in the rain that carry us forward. Now we'd love to hear from you. Where are you watching this story from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you never miss another story that just might change the way you see the world.